The day after my wedding, the one where my entire family was conspicuously absent, my father sent me 5 words: I need $8,400. Send it. No congratulations, no apology, just a demand. My response? A single dollar, sent with a message that sealed his fate. 2 weeks later, a thunderous hammering shook the front door of my home. When I opened it, my father, Edward Sterling, stood between 2 uniformed officers, clutching a cream-colored folder to his chest like a winning lottery ticket. She stole my money, he announced, then looked directly at me, and a wide, predatory smile spread across his face. I finally got you. One officer, Detective Clara Miller, asked if I had recently accessed a family account. The other, Officer Noah Reed, held up what looked like a bank statement, clearly showing an $8,400 transfer into an account under my name. For one terrifying second, even my husband, Arthur Hayes, looked confused, his brow furrowing as he tried to make sense of what he was seeing. My father's smile widened further, a silent declaration of victory. He truly believed that document had trapped me, that his scheme was foolproof. What he didn't know is that I'd spent my entire career examining altered recordings and digital evidence. He also didn't know I had meticulously preserved every single message, every voicemail, and one bizarre document he'd tried to force me to sign just before the wedding. Less than 5 minutes later, Detective Miller looked up from the folder, her expression hardening. "Sir," she said to my father, her voice cutting through the tension, "you need to step away from your daughter. You may be the person in trouble here." But that shocking discovery, the moment my father's smug confidence began to crumble, was only the first crack in a much larger scheme. It involved my inheritance, my younger brother, Julian, and a secret debt my father had hidden for nearly a year. It would expose everything. Before I tell you what my father said next, and how his attempt to have me arrested spectacularly backfired, let me take you back to how it all started. 3 days before my wedding, I was completely absorbed in my work, alone in the climate-controlled sound archive beneath Harborview's old municipal theater. Most people imagined I spent my days listening to beautiful music, but the reality was far less glamorous. I usually sat under harsh fluorescent lights, painstakingly removing static from damaged witness interviews, identifying splices in disputed recordings, or trying to recover voices buried under decades of noise. My job was to restore damaged audio for museums, attorneys, and historical foundations. I was good at it, meticulous, patient, and deeply attuned to the subtle manipulations of sound. That afternoon, I was cleaning a reel recorded by a factory worker back in 1968 when my phone lit up. It was the 7th missed call from my father. I already knew what he wanted. A week earlier, he'd placed a cream-colored folder beside my plate during dinner, declaring it contained routine continuity documents for Sterling Legacy Sales, the company he'd inherited from his own father. He wanted my signature notarized before my wedding. When I asked why a woman who had never worked a day for his company needed to sign anything, his expression hardened, growing cold and distant. He claimed the documents merely confirmed that I wouldn't interfere with the family business if something, God forbid, happened to him. But I'd learned to read between his lines years ago. I opened the folder and read the first page. The language authorized him to manage assets held in a trust created by my late grandmother. My grandmother, bless her heart, had left equal, protected shares to me and my younger brother. This document would have allowed my father, acting as a temporary trustee, to pledge my future distributions as collateral for whatever he wanted. When I refused, pushing the folder back towards him, he leaned across the table, his voice a low growl. "Everything you have came through this family. Don't mistake permission for independence." That sentence, it yanked me back in time. I was 19 again, standing in a college financial aid office, while he threatened to withdraw my tuition because I'd changed my major without consulting him. It took me back to age 26, when he called my landlord and tried to end my lease after I'd dared to decline a job at his auction house. His control was rarely loud or openly aggressive. It arrived disguised as assistance, followed by a hidden bill I'd never agreed to pay. I declined his 7th call and tried to return to my recording, but a voicemail appeared moments later. His voice, strained but still dripping with his usual manipulative charm, filled the quiet archive. "Eleanor, this wedding is becoming an embarrassment. Sign the papers and we can all move forward. Refuse and don't expect the family to celebrate choices that damage us." I saved that voicemail to 2 encrypted drives. It was an instinct born from my profession, not some premonition. At the time, I still foolishly believed my mother and brother would attend, even if my father stayed home in a fit of pique. My fiancé, Arthur Hayes, found me that evening in the theater lobby, staring blankly at my phone. Arthur was a railway safety engineer, a man who understood silence better than most people. He simply sat beside me, not asking for an explanation, just being present. When I finally played the voicemail, his jaw tightened. "Do you want to postpone?" he asked, his voice gentle but firm. "No," I said, the word coming out sharper than I intended. Postponing would have rewarded the threat. Still, I sent my mother one final message. "There will be seats for all of you. I hope you come." She read it. She never answered. On our wedding morning, the ceremony was held beneath the domed ceiling of a small planetarium, a unique venue the city rented for private events. Arthur and I had chosen it because our first date had been a public astronomy lecture there, where the projector failed, and we'd spent 2 hours talking in the glorious dark. Shortly before the doors opened, my best friend, Chloe Dawson, entered the preparation room, carrying a narrow package wrapped in nondescript gray paper. There was no return address, but my stomach clenched when I recognized my father's unmistakable handwriting on the label. Inside, nestled among tissue paper, was the unsigned continuity agreement, a gleaming silver pen, and a card containing a single, chilling sentence: "There is still time to prevent unnecessary consequences." It was not a wedding gift. It was a final demand. Chloe wanted to throw it away, to burn it, to make it disappear, but I wouldn't let her. I photographed every single page, every line, every word, and then locked the originals in the theater manager's safe. Only then did I walk into the planetarium, my heart heavy but my resolve firm. For chairs in the front row remained conspicuously empty. My father hadn't merely refused to attend. He had successfully persuaded my mother and brother, Julian, that appearing would be an act of betrayal against him. During the ceremony, I refused to cry. I refused to search the entrance each time it opened. I looked only at Arthur and said my vows beneath a projected field of shimmering stars, our own private galaxy. Halfway through the reception, however, Chloe handed me my phone. Julian had sent a message and deleted it almost immediately, but the notification preview remained on my screen. "I'm sorry. Dad says the company could collapse because of you." I took a screenshot before the notification vanished completely. That was the first undeniable sign that the documents, and my father's relentless demands, involved something far more sinister than just control. He was under severe financial pressure, and somehow he had decided my inheritance was his solution. Arthur asked if I wanted to confront him that night, to break through the facade. I looked around at the people who had shown up, the friends and loved ones who were celebrating with us without demanding anything in return, and I said, "Not today." For once, my father would not decide what my most important day became. Yet, as we left the planetarium, the memory of that gray package felt heavier than any actual wedding gift we carried home. Why would a supposedly successful businessman risk losing his daughter, his family, over one signature, unless he desperately needed what that signature could unlock? The following morning, Arthur and I woke in our converted printing factory loft. Unopened gifts still covered the dining table, and tiny silver paper stars from the planetarium were still caught in my hair. At precisely 7:12 a.m., my phone vibrated. My father's message appeared in stark, all-caps letters: "I need $8,400. Send it before noon." Beneath it was a routing number and the name of an escrow company I had never heard of. I texted back, asking what the payment covered. His answer came immediately: "Your portion of the emergency assessment. Don't play games." I immediately searched for the escrow company and discovered it handled short-term commercial loans, not family trusts. When I asked for an invoice, he called instead. I recorded the conversation, informing him, as Crestwood law and my own professional caution required, that he was being recorded. He claimed Sterling Legacy Sales had a temporary cash flow problem caused by a delayed estate sale. According to him, every beneficiary of my grandmother's trust was obligated to contribute $8,400 to prevent crippling penalties. I reminded him, my voice calm despite the churning in my stomach, that the trust document explicitly prohibited assessments against beneficiaries and that I had never authorized him to borrow against my share. His tone changed instantly, curdling into a familiar venom. "You enjoyed the benefits of this family for 33 years. Now you're hiding behind technical language because your husband has convinced you that you're better than us." Arthur hadn't said a single word about any of this. My father simply needed a new person to blame for losing control of me. I asked him directly, my voice steady, if he had already submitted the continuity agreement without my signature. Silence followed. Then, his voice flat and cold, he simply said, "You have until noon." He ended the call. I immediately contacted the attorney who had administered my grandmother's estate, but her former firm informed me she had retired and that the trust file had recently been transferred following a request from my father. They couldn't discuss any details until they verified my identity, a process that would take several days. At 11:58 a.m., just 2 minutes before his deadline, I opened my banking app. Part of me wanted to send nothing, to simply let him crash and burn. Another part, however, wanted a permanent record, something showing that I had responded only to his demand, that I had not accepted any debt. I transferred exactly $1 to the account he had provided and wrote, in the memo line, "No obligation acknowledged. Do not use my name or assets." The payment was symbolic, yes, but it was also traceable. Within 30 seconds, he called me 6 times. Then came the message that would later matter most. It simply read, "Now I have proof you participated." I didn't understand what he meant then, but I saved it anyway. For the next 2 weeks, he alternated between silence and relentless pressure. He emailed me a sprawling spreadsheet, claiming the trust owed nearly $70,000 in stabilization costs. But the document was a mess. No bank name, no loan number, no signatures, no legal references. It was just a collection of numbers, designed to look official but lacking any real substance. My mother sent me a short, clipped message claiming my stubbornness was placing employees' jobs at risk. And then, late one evening, my brother, Julian, called. It was past midnight. He whispered that he couldn't talk freely and asked if I had ever signed a digital authorization for the trust. When I said no, a sharp, ragged breath escaped him. "Then something is wrong," he said, before the line went dead. I tried calling him back immediately, but his phone went straight to voicemail. The next morning, my father emailed me a scanned page bearing what looked exactly like my signature. It was unnervingly convincing at first glance. It slanted upward in the same distinctive way mine did, even including the unusual break I always made between the P and H in Eleanor. But beneath it was a notary stamp dated for an afternoon I had spent inside the secure archive, logged into a workstation that required a biometric key to access. There was no way I could have been there and at a notary. I immediately forwarded the document to a private email account and requested my entry logs from the theater's security office. Arthur urged me to contact law enforcement right away, but I hesitated. I still lacked definitive proof that my father had actually used the document. A forged signature was alarming, yes, but I feared he would simply call it a clerical mistake and portray me as vindictive, as overly dramatic. That fear came from years of watching him twist narratives, altering the story until everyone questioned their own memory, their own sanity. I decided to gather undeniable facts before reacting. I downloaded every bank record I could, preserved the metadata from every single file he had sent, and meticulously created a timeline, starting from that dinner where he first presented the ominous agreement. My work had taught me that manipulation thrives on confusion. A clear, chronological timeline, however, turns confusion into sequence, and sequence, more often than not, exposes intent. Exactly 14 days after the wedding, I was in the kitchen, carefully labeling evidence folders, when someone struck the front door hard enough to rattle the glass. Arthur looked through the side window, his face suddenly grim. "Your father brought police," he said. When I opened the door, Edward Sterling stood beside Detective Clara Miller and Officer Noah Reed. My father wore his best navy overcoat, a familiar performance uniform, and held a slim leather portfolio against his chest. He looked less like a frightened victim seeking justice and more like a man arriving for a scheduled performance, utterly convinced he was about to deliver a flawless monologue. Detective Miller introduced herself, her voice calm and professional, and explained that my father had reported an unauthorized electronic transfer from a protected family account. He claimed I had taken $8,400 after refusing to cover a legitimate trust expense. Then, he opened his portfolio, dramatically displaying a printed statement. It appeared to show money leaving an account controlled by Sterling Legacy Sales and entering an account ending in the exact same 4 digits as mine. "She thought sending $1 back would make it look like a joke," he sneered. Then he looked directly at me, a wide, triumphant smile spreading across his face. "I finally got you." For one terrifying second, even Arthur looked confused, a flicker of doubt in his eyes. My father's smile widened further because he thought that carefully doctored document had trapped me. What he didn't know was that I had spent my entire career examining altered recordings and digital evidence. He also didn't know I had preserved every message, every voicemail, and that one strange document he had tried to make me sign before the wedding. Detective Miller didn't arrest me or immediately accept my father's version of events. She simply asked if she and Officer Reed could speak with me inside. I agreed, but I told them my father could remain on the porch. He protested loudly that it was a family matter and that he had a right to hear my answers. Detective Miller's reply was curt. "You made it a police matter when you filed the report, sir." Arthur stood right beside me as I calmly explained everything: the wedding, the unsigned trust agreement, the $8,400 demand, and my symbolic $1 transfer. I showed them my actual banking history on my phone. It contained no incoming $8,400 payment, only my single outgoing dollar transaction. My father, still on the porch, shouted through the open doorway that I had hidden the funds in another account. Detective Miller asked him to stop interrupting, her patience clearly wearing thin. She then turned her attention to the statement he had provided. It displayed a transaction identification number, a timestamp, and a certification line supposedly generated by Horizon Coast Bank. The page looked official, but three small details screamed at me, details that only someone in my line of work might immediately catch. First, the typeface used in the transaction line differed ever so slightly from the rest of the statement. Second, the final digit of the routing number was subtly misaligned. And third, the document properties visible on the printed footer listed the file as having been exported from a common image editing program, not a secure banking portal. I didn't declare it forged outright. I simply pointed out the inconsistencies and offered them the original email my father had sent with the alleged transfer details. Detective Miller used her department tablet to contact the bank's fraud unit through a verified number. While she waited, Officer Reed asked my father where he had obtained the statement. He mumbled that his accountant had downloaded it. When asked for the accountant's name, he glanced nervously toward the driveway and said the employee was unavailable. I knew immediately he meant Julian. Detective Miller finally reached a fraud investigator who confirmed that the transaction identification number on my father's document belonged to a completely different payment made 9 months earlier to an equipment supplier. No $8,400 transfer to me had ever occurred. The investigator also stated that the account shown in the header of my father's statement had been restricted 3 days earlier due to suspected document irregularities connected to a commercial loan. My father's expression changed. The triumphant smile vanished, replaced by a mask of sudden, cold fear. He stepped toward Detective Miller, his voice suddenly conciliatory. "There's been a misunderstanding," he stammered. She asked him directly if he had edited the statement. He vehemently denied it. But then, Officer Reed noticed something inside my father's portfolio. A second version of the same statement, partially visible beneath a loan notice. On that version, the original equipment supplier's name had not yet been replaced with mine. My father lunged for the folder, but Officer Reed quickly moved it away, his hand firmly on my father's arm, telling him not to touch it. The porch fell silent. Detective Miller compared the two documents, her gaze fixed on my father. She asked him to explain why he possessed both an original transaction record and an altered copy explicitly naming his daughter. His answer shifted 3 times in less than a minute. First, he blamed his accountant. Then, he claimed a bank employee must have made an error. Finally, he insisted I had planted the second page when he attended my wedding. Arthur, who had been silent through all of this, spoke up, his voice quiet but clear. "You weren't at our wedding, Edward." That single sentence, simple and irrefutable, stripped away the last of my father's confidence. Detective Miller turned on her body camera's evidence marker and informed him that knowingly submitting altered financial documents with a police complaint could constitute filing a false report and attempted fraud. He tried to leave. Officer Reed moved to block him, telling him he was not free to remove the portfolio until they had determined what evidence it contained. My father looked at me then, as though I had betrayed him by simply allowing reality to proceed. "Tell them this is a misunderstanding," he ordered, his voice laced with the same imperious tone he had used when I was a teenager. It wasn't a request. It was an expectation that I would repair the consequences of his decisions, that I would lie for him, protect him again. I met his gaze, my voice steady. "I didn't create those documents." He lowered his voice, a venomous hiss. "You have no idea what you're destroying." Detective Miller heard him, and her eyes flickered to me. "Do you feel threatened, ma'am?" Before I could answer, Julian's name appeared on my phone screen. I put the call on speaker, with his permission. Julian sounded breathless, terrified. He said our father had instructed him to prepare a police packet using bank statements from the company's files. But Julian had refused after noticing that the alleged transfer to me had never actually occurred. My father, in a rage, had then locked him out of the accounting system and completed the packet himself. Julian then revealed why the $8,400 mattered so much. Sterling Legacy Sales had taken a high-interest bridge loan to purchase a collection of rare mechanical clocks. The collection, it turned out, contained several sophisticated reproductions, and the expected resale collapsed completely. The lender had demanded an $8,400 cure payment to prevent an immediate audit of the collateral. My father had already pledged assets from my grandmother's trust, including my protected share, using an authorization that Julian now suspected was forged. My $1 transfer had been used to suggest that I knew about the loan and had voluntarily participated in servicing it. That explained my father's chilling message. Now I have proof you participated. He had planned to combine my tiny, symbolic transfer, the forged authorization, and the altered statement into a seamless, damning story where I first agreed to the transaction, then stole the money during a family dispute. Detective Miller asked Julian to come to the station and bring any records he could legally access. My father, his face contorted with rage, shouted that Julian was an ungrateful coward and that I had poisoned him against the family. The detective, her voice sharper now, instructed my father to place his hands where she could see them. He wasn't arrested on my porch, but he was informed that the documents were being seized and that he needed to accompany the officers for a formal interview. Before he entered the police car, he looked back at me. There was no apology in his face, no hint of regret, only cold, hard calculation. "This company paid for your life," he said, his voice low and menacing. "When it falls, everyone will know you caused it." My reply was immediate. "No, the records will show who caused it." 5 minutes earlier, he had expected to watch the police lead me away in handcuffs. Instead, they took his portfolio, his statement, and the first physical evidence of a much larger fraud. The police visit didn't end the conflict. It transformed it. That afternoon, Detective Miller advised me not to communicate with my father except in writing, and not to access any family accounts, even those legally connected to my inheritance. She explained that the altered statement was serious, but proving who created it and why would require subpoenas, extensive bank records, device examinations, and multiple interviews. My father returned home after several hours because investigators weren't yet ready to file charges. By evening, he had already begun shaping a new version of events. He told relatives that I had manipulated my brother, sabotaged the company, and humiliated him in front of the police over a simple bookkeeping dispute. My mother called Arthur, her voice laced with accusation, saying he was isolating me from my family. Arthur put the call on speaker and calmly asked whether she had seen the forged authorization. She paused, a long, telling silence, then said my father had assured her that I had signed it before changing my mind. That answer told me everything I needed to know. She had accepted his story, his version of the truth, without once asking me. The following day, a courier delivered a letter printed on Sterling Legacy Sales stationery. My father wrote that I had 7 days to reimburse the company $8,400, withdraw my allegations, and sign a statement confirming that all trust transactions had been authorized. If I refused, he promised to sue me for interference with business relationships, challenge my inheritance, and release private family information to Arthur's employer. The final paragraph dripped with contempt. A loyal daughter would correct this before outsiders destroy what generations of our family built. The threat was darker, far more insidious than his original letter, because it revealed his real goal. He didn't merely want the money. He wanted a signed statement, a legal document that could sanitize his earlier transactions and protect him from the consequences of his fraud. Arthur read the letter twice, his jaw clenched, then said, "We need someone who understands financial coercion, not just family law." My best friend, Chloe, recommended Nora Quinn, an attorney who had represented a nonprofit after its director falsified donor records. Nora's office occupied the second floor of a former pharmacy, and nothing about her manner was dramatic. She read documents slowly, asked precise, pointed questions, and never interrupted. After reviewing the original trust agreement, the suspicious loan materials, my saved messages, and that damning forged signature page, she said my father's conduct potentially involved identity theft, forgery, attempted theft of trust assets, witness intimidation, and a clear abuse of fiduciary authority. But she also identified something I had completely missed. The document my father wanted me to sign after the wedding contained a retroactive effective date. Signing it would not simply authorize future management. It would ratify every single transaction he had made during the previous 18 months. Nora immediately sent preservation notices to the auction company, the lender, the escrow firm, my grandmother's former law office, and even the notary whose stamp appeared on the forged page. She didn't waste a moment. She filed an emergency petition requesting that my father be suspended as acting trustee until the court could review the accounts. And she responded to his threatening letter with 3 clear, concise sentences. I denied the debt. I would not sign any statement. And all future contact must go through counsel. My father reacted by escalating again. He posted a long, rambling message in the company's private employee group, claiming an unnamed family member was attempting a hostile takeover. He scheduled an emergency meeting with senior staff and asked them to sign loyalty declarations. Julian refused. And for that, he was fired during the meeting. That decision became another catastrophic mistake. Julian had spent 6 years reconciling the company's accounts, and before losing access, he had preserved routine backups, exactly according to company policy. He turned those backups over to his own attorney, who then coordinated with investigators. The files showed that my father had moved money between the auction company, the trust, and 3 temporary holding accounts whenever a lender requested proof of liquidity. The same funds were displayed repeatedly as though they were separate assets. My protected trust share had been listed as collateral on 2 loan applications. One application contained my forged digital signature. The other stated that I was an unpaid financial advisor to the company, a position I had never, ever held. Even more damaging, the metadata showed that both files had been created on my father's office computer. The notary whose stamp appeared on my authorization told investigators she had never met me. She had notarized several legitimate company documents months earlier, and someone had simply copied her stamp from one of those pages. When Nora explained all of this evidence to me, I felt vindicated, yes, but not triumphant. Every single fact confirmed that my father had spent months, years, constructing a version of me that existed only on paper. Cooperative when he needed collateral. Dishonest when he needed a suspect. Unstable when he needed sympathy. Had he always seen me as a daughter, or had I simply become another asset the moment I stopped obeying? Nora warned me that the coming weeks would be uncomfortable. My father might offer reconciliation, threaten public humiliation, or pressure my mother to contact me. Your advantage, she said, her voice calm and steady, is that he keeps believing relationships matter more than records. In court, records matter. We requested a protective order covering direct threats and interference with my employment. The judge didn't grant every restriction, but he ordered my father not to contact me directly, dispose of trust assets, alter company files, or represent that I had authorized financial transactions. For the first time in my life, a boundary with my father existed outside my own will. It was written, signed, and enforceable. He could no longer erase it by simply raising his voice. The emergency trust hearing took place 6 weeks after the police arrived at my door. My father entered the courtroom with 2 attorneys and the expression of a man who believed confidence could substitute for credibility. My mother sat behind him. She did not look at me. Julian sat on the opposite side with his own counsel, still carrying the exhaustion of someone who had lost both a job and the version of his father he had defended for years. Nora presented the case without exaggeration. She showed the original trust restrictions, the forged authorization, my security logs proving I was inside the archive when the document was supposedly notarized, and the metadata connecting the altered files directly to my father's computer. She played the voicemail in which he told me to sign or lose the family support. Then she introduced his message following my $1 transfer. Now I have proof you participated. My father's attorney argued that the phrase referred only to a shared family obligation. Nora asked what legal document created that obligation. No one produced one. The lender's compliance officer testified that Sterling Legacy Sales had represented me as a consenting beneficiary whose trust interest could secure the loan. Without that representation, the loan would not have been approved. The escrow company confirmed that the requested $8,400 was not my assessment. It was the exact delinquency needed to postpone a collateral audit for 14 days. My father had demanded the money the morning after my wedding because the lender's deadline was noon. He had skipped the ceremony, not simply out of anger, but because he spent that day meeting a private buyer and attempting to sell part of the questionable clock collection before the lender inspected it. My wedding had collided with his financial crisis, and he chose the crisis. When I refused to rescue him, he needed to make me responsible for it. Julian then testified that our father ordered him to alter accounting descriptions and prepare a fraudulent statement for the police. My father's attorney suggested Julian was retaliating because he had been fired. Julian answered by producing an email sent before his termination, in which he had warned our father that reporting a non-existent theft would be illegal. The email ended with, "Eleanor did not authorize these loans. Stop using her name." My father's reply, "Do what you're paid to do." That line changed the room. My mother lowered her head, her face buried in her hands. The judge suspended my father as trustee immediately and appointed an independent fiduciary to review every transaction made since my grandmother's death. The court also froze distributions connected to Sterling legacy sales and referred the apparent forgery and false statements to prosecutors. Outside the courtroom, reporters from a regional business journal waited because Sterling legacy sales had sponsored museums and charity events for decades. My father tried to walk past them, but one reporter asked why his daughter's inheritance had appeared on company loan documents. His carefully maintained public image began collapsing in real time, right before my eyes. I did not give an interview. Nora released a brief statement saying only that I was cooperating with investigators and seeking only the protection of assets legally left to me. That restraint mattered. My father had spent years telling people I was emotional and impulsive. The less I performed for the cameras, the more his own documents spoke. Over the next month, the consequences multiplied. The state suspended the auction company's professional license pending review. 2 consignors removed valuable estates from upcoming sales. The lender declared default after discovering false collateral representations. An insurance carrier refused to cover losses connected to intentional misstatements. Employees learned that payroll taxes had been paid late while my father continued leasing an expensive car through the company. Several resigned. My mother finally asked to meet me, through Nora. I agreed, but only if Arthur and Chloe were present, and the conversation took place in Nora's conference room. My mother arrived holding the wedding invitation she had never used. She admitted my father told her that attending would signal approval of my refusal to save the family. He also claimed I intended to seize the auction house and sell it. She said she had believed him because questioning him made life at home unbearable. I understood her fear, but understanding did not erase her choice. "You left an empty chair at my wedding because his anger was more important than the truth," I said. She cried and asked whether we could begin again. I told her beginning again required honesty, counseling, and absolutely no messages carried on my father's behalf. I did not promise forgiveness on a schedule. Julian's apology was different. He did not ask me to excuse him. He admitted he had ignored warning signs because the company paid his salary and because being our father's favored child felt safer than becoming his target. He gave me access to the complete trust records and helped the independent fiduciary trace missing funds. The review discovered that my father had diverted more than $190,000 from trust-controlled investments over 4 years. Some money covered company losses. Some paid personal expenses. The $8,400 had been only the smallest visible piece. Prosecutors filed charges connected to forgery, attempted financial fraud, filing a false police report, and misappropriation of fiduciary funds. My father was not dragged away in a theatrical courtroom scene. His punishment was slower and far more complete. He lost control of the company, the trust, and the meticulously crafted story he had told about himself for decades. He was required to surrender his passport, refrain from contacting witnesses, and submit all financial records to the court. The man who had always treated access as power could no longer enter his own office without permission from a court-appointed manager. Still, he made one final, desperate attempt. Through his attorney, he offered to plead responsibility for accounting errors if I issued a public statement saying family stress had caused misunderstandings. In exchange, he would stop challenging my inheritance. Nora read the proposal aloud. I almost laughed. He was offering to stop stealing what was already mine if I helped protect his reputation. I rejected it outright. Months after my wedding, my father entered a plea agreement. Rather than face trial, he pleaded guilty to felony forgery, attempted fraud, and misuse of assets, receiving a custodial sentence and permanent bar from trusteeship. Sterling legacy sales dissolved, his car and lake house liquidated. These weren't my revenge, but his own consequences. My inheritance was largely restored. Julian found new work. My mother began counseling. I learned setting a boundary didn't break my family. It revealed what was already broken, allowing honest parts to heal. My $1 transfer, which he thought proved participation, connected his demand to the lender's deadline, unraveling his entire scheme. What's your take on Eleanor's refusal to compromise her truth? Have you ever had to set a difficult boundary to protect yourself? Share your thoughts below.